The sweet tea glass hit the concrete patio, so hard it cracked clean in two. Not Brandon's glass. Mine. I hadn't meant to set it down that fast. But when a man you've never met looks at you like he's just seen someone walk out of a burning building, you lose track of your hands. A second earlier, Brandon had been laughing. That big, open-mouth laugh he'd been doing since we were kids. The one that made his whole face go red and his shoulders shake. Half the party was laughing with him. "Let me guess," he said, loud enough for the whole back patio to hear. "They called you Duchess? Cupcake? Something like that?" I took one slow breath before I answered. "Hades. Just that. One word. Flat. No explanation." The retired Air Force officer standing near the cooler, a man I'd noticed exactly once, when he arrived quietly and took the folding chair farthest from the speakers, went completely still. His paper cup stopped halfway to his mouth. Something moved across his face that wasn't quite recognition. It was older than that. Heavier. "No," he said. Barely a whisper. Then he stood up straight. And he saluted me. Right there between the potato salad and the string lights, in front of my aunt, my cousins, my Uncle Ray who'd never once asked what I did for 22 years in the Air Force. A full salute. Eyes forward. Like we were standing on a flight line in Kandahar, and not my Aunt Donna's backyard outside Waco, Texas. Brandon's laugh died so completely it was like it had never existed. The strange thing about that moment, and I've turned it over in my mind more times than I can count, is that I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. The way you feel when something you've been carrying a long time finally gets set down, and your arms don't know what to do with themselves. A few hours earlier, I had been sitting in my truck in the parking lot of a Buc-ee's off Highway 35, 40 minutes outside Waco. Engine running. AC on full. My hands on the wheel and absolutely nowhere else to be. I'd been staring at the invitation on the passenger seat, Donna 75th, come celebrate, family only, and trying to remember the last time I'd felt like family here. I almost didn't go. I should have remembered that the people who almost don't show up are usually the ones the room needed most. Aunt Donna's property sat on 4 acres of flat Central Texas land that looked exactly the same every time I came back to it. Same rusted wind vane on the barn roof. Same 3 live oaks along the fence line that had been dying slowly for as long as I could remember. Same gravel driveway that popped under tires like a warning shot. I pulled in around 2 in the afternoon. Trucks and SUVs already lined both sides of the drive, a couple of them with gun racks, one with a Baylor sticker peeling off the rear window. A hand-painted banner hung between 2 wooden posts near the gate, 75 and still kicking. "Happy birthday, Donna." Someone had drawn a little cowboy boot next to her name. I sat in the truck for another minute before getting out. The smell hit me first. Mesquite smoke and lighter fluid and something sweet, Donna's peach cobbler, probably, already in the oven. Underneath it, the particular smell of cut grass drying in July heat. It was 91 degrees at 2 in the afternoon in McLennan County, and the air was thick enough to lean against. I grabbed the bottle of wine I'd brought, a Malbec, because I didn't know what else to bring to something like this, and walked toward the back gate. I heard them before I saw them. Brandon's voice carried the way it always had. He was holding court near the grill, spatula in one hand, beer in the other, telling a story that had 4 other people leaning in. He was 43 years old and he'd sold medical equipment in the Dallas-Fort Worth area for the last 15 years, and he talked about it the way some men talk about combat. Territory. Quotas. The ones he'd beaten out. I'd heard variations of this story at every family gathering since 2009. My cousin looked up when I came through the gate. His smile didn't change, but something behind it recalibrated. "Maggie." He said it like a sitcom character greeting someone they'd forgotten to invite. "You actually made it." "I actually made it," I said. He pointed the spatula at the wine bottle. "Didn't know you were a wine person." "There's a lot you don't know about me, Brandon." I said it lightly. I meant it completely. Donna found me before I'd taken 10 steps into the yard. She was 75 years old and 4'11", and she hugged me the way small women hug. Full commitment. No hesitation. Both arms locked around your ribs like she was afraid you'd float away. She smelled like Chanel No. 5 and peach cobbler and something underneath both of those things that just smelled like her. "You look thin," she said immediately. "You look 75, I said. She laughed and smacked my arm and pulled me toward the food table like I was 16 again. That was the thing about Donna. She was the only one in this family who had never once made me feel like I needed to explain myself. She'd never asked me what I actually did in the Air Force, but she'd also never assumed it was nothing. She just looked at me the way she always had, with that particular kind of love that doesn't require comprehension. It was enough. For a long time, it had been the only thing that was. I found a folding chair near the edge of the patio, away from the main cluster of conversation. Set my wine down. Looked out at the yard. There were maybe 30 people here. Cousins I recognized. Cousins I didn't. Uncle Ray holding a can of Coors Light with both hands, nodding along to something his son-in-law was saying. A group of women my mother's age clustered near the pecan tree, talking in the way women at family gatherings talk, efficient, layered, about 6 different things at once. And at the far corner of the patio alone, in a folding chair he'd positioned slightly apart from everyone else, sat an old man I didn't recognize. He was in his late 70s, maybe 80. Straight-backed in a way that doesn't come from good posture. It comes from decades of standing at attention until your spine forgets how to do anything else. Gray hair cut close. Hands wrapped around a paper cup, completely still. He wasn't watching the party. He was watching the tree lean. I didn't think much of him. Not yet. I got up to get another tea, and Brandon materialized at my elbow the way he always did, like a weather event you saw coming but couldn't quite get out of the way of in time. So he said, "You retired for real this time?" 2 years ago. And now what? Consulting? Teaching? Not much of anything, I said. For now. He nodded slowly, in that particular way that means someone is composing their next sentence rather than listening to yours. Must be nice, he said. Government pension and all that. I looked at him for a moment. Sure, I said. Something like that. Brandon smiled, took a long pull of his beer, and let his eyes drift back toward his audience near the grill, already half gone to the next thing. I poured my tea. The old man in the corner chair hadn't moved. The thing about being invisible in a room full of people who know your name is that it happens so gradually you almost don't notice it becoming permanent. It had started the summer I left for the Air Force Academy. I was 18. Brandon was 20, already enrolled at Texas A&M on a partial business scholarship, already talking about the future the way he talked about everything, loud, certain, like the outcome was a formality. At the going-away dinner Donna hosted in this same backyard, he'd shaken my hand and said, "Good for you, Maggie. I could never handle all that discipline." It was the nicest thing he would say to me for the next 22 years. After that, every time I came home to a slightly smaller version of myself. Not because anyone was cruel about it. That was the part that took me a long time to understand. Nobody sat me down and told me I didn't matter. They just didn't ask. Didn't turn conversations in my direction. Didn't wonder, out loud or otherwise, what it was like to be the person I was becoming 1,200 miles away from McLennan County. And when you spend enough years not being asked, you stop offering. You learn to take up exactly as much space as the room has decided to give you. Which, in this family, was not very much. I was on my second glass of tea when Brandon drifted back toward the patio with 3 of his friends from the Waco Chamber of Commerce, men I'd never met, men who looked like they'd met 1,000 times before. He made introductions the way he always did, with the confidence of someone who controls the narrative. "This is my cousin Maggie," he said. "She was in the Air Force." "Were you a nurse?" one of the men asked. Pleasantly. "No malice." "Pilot," I said. "Oh wow." He nodded in the way people nod when they're surprised but don't want to seem surprised. "Transport planes? That kind of thing?" I looked at him for a half-second. "Fighter aircraft," I said. F-16s mostly. Later transitioned to F-35s. There was a brief pause, the kind that happens when information doesn't quite fit the frame someone has already built. "Huh," the man said. And then, genuinely uncertain what to do next, he turned back to Brandon and asked him something about the Cowboys' preseason roster. Brandon answered immediately. The conversation moved on. It always moved on. I didn't follow it. I had learned somewhere around year 8 or 9 of my career that there were 2 kinds of people in rooms like this one. The first kind heard F-16 pilot and felt a door open. They leaned in, They asked follow-up questions. They wanted to know what the inside of the cockpit smelled like and whether you got used to the G-force and what it felt like the first time you broke the sound barrier alone at 40,000 feet over the Mojave Desert. The second kind heard it and felt a door close. Not from cruelty. From the simple human instinct to retreat from information that doesn't match the story they've already decided is true. My family, almost entirely, were the second kind. You were like a desk pilot, right? Brandon said later, when the Chamber of Commerce men had wandered toward the food. He said it with that particular half-smile he used when he wanted to say something pointed and maintain plausible deniability. Like, you didn't actually go anywhere dangerous. I set my tea down carefully. I did 3 deployments, I said. Bagram. Al-Udeid. Kandahar. Right. He waved his hand vaguely, like I'd cited a list of minor administrative details. But you were support, yeah. Not like actually in it. The words were so precisely, accidentally wrong that for a moment I couldn't locate a response to them. Not because they hurt. Because they were so far from the truth that engaging with them felt like trying to correct a map of a country that no longer exists. Sure, I said. Something like that. It was the second time I'd said those words to him today. It would not be the last. Across the yard, the old man in the folding chair had shifted slightly. He was looking at me now. Not the way people look when they're eavesdropping. The way people look when they've heard a word that means something specific, something that reaches back through years and pulls. I didn't notice it then. I was too busy reminding myself that I had chosen to come here. That Donna was 75 and she smelled like Chanel No. 5 and peach cobbler, and she loved me without needing to understand me. That was enough. That had always been enough. I picked up my tea. I told myself I was fine. I had been telling myself that for a very long time. It was the word Kandahar that did it. I don't know why that one and not the others. I'd said Bagram 100 times at family gatherings over the years and felt nothing. Just a place name, just a coordinate on a map that meant something to me and nothing to anyone else in the room. But Kandahar sat differently in my chest. It always had. It was the kind of word that arrived with weight already attached, the way certain songs do. You hear the first 2 notes and your body knows before your mind catches up. I excused myself from the patio and walked to the far edge of the yard, near the fence line where the live oaks threw enough shade to make the heat almost bearable. I stood there with my tea and looked out at the flat brown land stretching toward the horizon and let myself go back, just for a moment, the way I sometimes did when I wasn't paying close enough attention to stop it. September 14, 2009. I was 31 years old and I had been in Afghanistan for 6 weeks, and I was flying a combat air patrol over Kandahar province when the call came in. 2 Army Ranger units pinned down in a valley 7 miles southeast of the airfield. Air support requested. Immediate. I remember the way the radio sounded. Not panicked. Rangers don't panic. Not out loud, but tight. Compressed. The kind of voice that is holding something very large very carefully. I rolled in. I won't describe what happened in the valley. I won't describe it because I have spent 15 years building a wall around that 37 minutes, and I am not going to take it apart in the middle of my Aunt Donna's birthday party, not even inside my own head. What I will say is this: when it was over, I had expended ordnance, the Rangers were alive, and I was bringing my aircraft back to Kandahar airfield with a hydraulic warning light and a left stabilizer that was responding 3 seconds slower than it should have been. The approach was bad. I knew it was bad from the moment I called it in. The control tower knew it. The ground crew knew it. There was a moment, about 40 feet off the deck, gear down, airspeed bleeding off faster than I wanted, when I understood with complete physical clarity that this landing was either going to work or it wasn't, and that I had done everything I could do, and that the rest was no longer mine. It worked. I rolled out, brought the aircraft to a stop, and sat in the cockpit for a long moment before I opened the canopy. My hands were shaking. Not from fear. Fear had already burned through and gone. From the particular exhaustion that follows complete expenditure of everything you have. When I climbed down, one of the ground crew, a young staff sergeant from Decatur, Georgia, couldn't have been 22 years old, looked at me with an expression I didn't have a name for at the time. Later I would understand it was the look of someone who had watched something go wrong and come right at the last possible second and hadn't yet decided how to feel about it. That was something, ma'am, he said. Yeah, I said. It was something. 3 days later, my squadron gave me the call sign. Hades. God of the underworld. The one the others don't talk about. The one who is always there, waiting at the edge of things, doing the work that nobody wants to name out loud. I hadn't chosen it. You never choose your own call sign, that's the whole point. Your call sign is what other people see in you that you can't see in yourself. And what they saw in me, apparently, was someone who went into the dark places and came back. Someone who operated in the space between alive and not, between mission accomplished and unrecoverable, and found a way through. I had carried that name for 15 years. I had never once said it in this backyard. Not because I was ashamed of it. Because explaining a call sign means explaining what you did to earn it, and explaining what you did to earn it means opening a door to a room that I had decided, a long time ago, was not available for family gatherings. Some things belong to the people who were there. Some things lose something essential in translation. They become stories instead of truths, and I was not willing to make Kandahar into a story. So I kept it. I kept it the way you keep anything that matters too much to risk, carefully to privately, in a place where it couldn't be diminished by someone else's inability to understand it. The shade from the live oaks had shifted. I'd been standing there longer than I realized. From across the yard, I could hear Brandon's voice rising above the country music, working toward the punchline of something. I heard scattered laughter. I heard my Uncle Ray's distinctive cough laugh, the one that meant he found something funnier than he wanted to admit. I finished my tea. I told myself 2 more hours. Just 2 more hours and then you get in the truck and you drive back to Austin and you sleep in your own bed, and this is just another afternoon that happened. I walked back toward the patio. I did not know that I was walking toward the last moment of a very long silence. The toast started the way bad things often start at family gatherings. Innocently, almost accidentally, with someone picking up a beer and saying, "Hey, can I get everyone's attention for a second?" Brandon was standing near the grill. He had the easy confidence of a man who had never once walked into a room and wondered whether he belonged in it. His polo shirt was white, freshly pressed even in 91-degree heat, the kind of shirt that announces itself. He was holding his beer with 2 fingers around the neck, relaxed, like this was something he did all the time. Which, I suppose it was. "I just want to say a few words about Aunt Donna," he started. People drifted closer. The Chamber of Commerce men. Uncle Ray. A cluster of cousins I recognized from Christmas cards. Someone turned the music down. The afternoon had that particular golden hour quality. Light going amber and horizontal, shadows stretching long across the dry grass, that makes everything feel slightly more significant than it is. Brandon talked about Donna the way he talked about everything. Warmly but efficiently, with the cadence of someone who has given enough toasts to know that the audience's patience has a ceiling. He said she was the heart of this family. He said she was the reason they all still showed up. He said she was proof that some people just make the world better by being in it. It was true. All of it. I found myself nodding. And then he pivoted. The way a weather system pivots, you feel the pressure change a half-second before you understand what's coming. "I also want to take a moment," he said, with a smile that was warm enough to pass for genuine, "to acknowledge all the members of this family who've served our country in various capacities." A few people clapped. Uncle Ray raised his chorus. "We've got some real American heroes in this family." Brandon swept his beer in a wide arc. "My dad did 2 years National Guard. Ray over there, what was it, Ray, Army Reserve?" "4 years," Ray said. 4 years. God bless you, man." He pointed the bottle. "And of course we've got Maggie, who spent," he paused, performed a brief mental calculation, 22 years in the Air Force. People looked at me. I looked back at them. 22 years, Brandon repeated, nodding slowly, like he was genuinely impressed. "That is a long time to be, well." He smiled. The smile of a man who has decided the room is his and has been right about that for long enough that he's stopped checking. To be honest, I could never figure out exactly what Maggie did over there. I always figured she was keeping the paperwork straight so the real pilots could focus on flying. Laughter. Scattered, easy, the kind that doesn't mean anything specific. People laughing because the person holding the beer laughed first, because that's what you do at parties when someone makes a joke that's just sharp enough to be funny and just soft enough to be deniable. My Uncle Ray laughed. Not cruelly. He just laughed because everyone else did, the way he always had, the way he would have laughed at anything in that moment. Two of the cousins near the pecan tree exchanged a glance and looked at their shoes. I felt the old familiar calculus running, the one I'd been running at family gatherings for 22 years. How much does it cost to correct this? What it would change? Whether the correction would land as information or as aggression. Whether the moment was worth the conversation it would open. Whether I had the energy on a Tuesday afternoon in July in Waco, Texas at my Aunt Donna's 75th birthday party to explain to 30 people what I had actually done with my life. I set my tea down. Carefully. Both hands. I said nothing. Brandon raised his beer higher. To Donna, he said. And to family. And to all the different ways we serve. To Donna, people said. Glasses went up. The music came back on a little louder than before. Brandon caught my eye across the patio and gave me a small nod, the nod of a man who believes he has just been generous. Who believes that mentioning someone at all is the same as seeing them. I nodded back. Because what else do you do? What else do you do when someone has just held up a photograph of you and shown the whole room a stranger, and everyone clapped, and the stranger looked enough like you that nobody noticed the difference? I picked up my tea, and that was when I heard the sound. Not loud. Almost nothing, really. Just the scrape of aluminum legs against concrete. The particular sound of a folding chair being pushed back slowly by someone who has made a decision. I turned. The old man in the corner was standing up. He hadn't touched his food. His paper cup was still mostly full. He was looking at Brandon with an expression I could not immediately read. Not anger, not amusement, not the polite blankness of someone waiting for a conversation to end. Something older than any of those things. Something that had been sitting very still for a very long time and had just decided it was done sitting. He took one step forward. Then he stopped. And he looked at me instead. And in that look, in the 5 seconds before he said a single word, I felt something shift in the air over that patio the same way air shifts before a storm. Not threatening. Not violent. Just the unmistakable physical fact of pressure changing. Of something large moving into position. Brandon was still smiling. He had no idea. He didn't move fast. That was the first thing. He crossed the patio the way men of a certain age and a certain background move. Unhurried, deliberate, with the particular economy of someone who has learned that speed is rarely the variable that matters. Every step landed like it meant something. Like he had decided, before he took it, exactly where it was going to go. The party didn't stop all at once. It stopped in pieces. The Chamber of Commerce men first. They felt him coming before they saw him, the way you feel a change in wind direction. Then the cousins near the pecan tree. Then Uncle Ray, who lowered his cores slowly, the way you lower something when you're not sure yet whether you'll need your hands free. The music kept playing for another few seconds, something by George Strait, tinny through old speakers, and then whoever was standing closest to the Bluetooth speaker reached over and turned it off without being asked. By the time the old man reached the edge of the main patio, maybe 30 people had gone quiet. Brandon hadn't noticed yet. He was finishing a side conversation with one of his chamber friends, laughing at something, beer loose in his hand. He turned around when he felt the silence, that particular social instinct that tells you the room has reorganized itself around something that isn't you. The old man looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then he looked at me. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was unhurried. Low. The kind of voice that doesn't need volume because it has never needed volume. Because for decades, people simply paid attention when it spoke. I want to make sure I heard that correctly. He was talking to Brandon. But he was looking at me. Her call sign. He paused. "Did you say Hades?" The word landed in the silence like a stone into still water. I watched Brandon's smile recalibrate, searching for the correct social response to a question he didn't understand yet. Brandon glanced at me, then back at the old man. I don't know her call sign. I was just joking around. I didn't. I'm not asking about the joke, the old man said. Quietly. Without cruelty. The way you correct a navigation error, not with blame, just with precision. He looked at me directly now. "Ma'am, were you with the 74th Fighter Squadron out of Moody? 2009? The question hit me somewhere below the sternum. 22 years of keeping that door closed. 22 years of sure, something like that, and just keeping the paperwork straight and setting my tea down carefully and saying nothing. And this man, This stranger in a folding chair at my aunt's birthday party had just walked through that door like he had a key. Yes, I said. One word. The same way I'd said Hades. Flat. No explanation. But this time my voice did something it hadn't done in a long time. It landed differently. Like it recognized something. The old man closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. When he opened them, they were wet. Not crying. Not yet. Just wet. The way eyes go when something that has been held in place for a very long time suddenly shifts. Kandahar Airfield, he said. September 14th, 2009. You came in with a compromised stabilizer and a hydraulic warning light. You had 6 minutes of fuel reserve when you touched down. And before that, he stopped. Swallowed once. Before that, you pulled 2 Ranger units out of a valley that we had all already written off. The patio was so quiet I could hear the mesquite crackling in the grill. I was the Joint Terminal Attack Controller on the ground that day, he said. I was the one on the radio. I called in the air support. A pause. I never knew who answered. I had thought sometimes about the voice on the radio. In the years since Kandahar, in the middle of the night, in the particular silence of a house with no one else in it, I had thought about the voice that had given me the target coordinates that day. Tight. Compressed. Holding something very large very carefully. I had thought about the men in that valley. Whether they had made it home. Whether they knew that someone had come. I had never imagined standing 20 feet from that voice in my Aunt Donna's backyard. They made it, I said. Because that was the only thing that mattered. The only thing it had ever mattered to say. You're Rangers. All of them. The old man, Colonel James Pruitt, I would learn later, retired, 28 years Air Force combat controller, 3 tours, 2 silver stars, made a sound that was not quite a word. Something that lived below language. Something that had been waiting 14 years for that specific sentence. Then he straightened. Full height. Shoulders back. Chin level. The posture of a man standing at attention on a flight line, not a patio in Central Texas. And he saluted me. Clean. Precise. Right hand, correct angle, eyes forward. In front of my aunt, my cousins, Uncle Ray with his cores halfway to his mouth and his arm frozen there. In front of Brandon, who was standing completely still with his beer at his side, his smile gone so completely it was like it had never existed, like that particular expression had simply been recalled, quietly, without ceremony, because the room it had been designed for no longer existed. I returned the salute. I don't know how long it lasted. 4 seconds. 5. Long enough that it became something. Not just a gesture but a transfer of weight and acknowledgement, a conversation conducted entirely without words between 2 people who had been on the same frequency 14 years ago and had never known it until this exact moment. When my hand came down, the old man nodded once. Thank you, he said, for coming back. He didn't mean from Afghanistan. I knew exactly what he meant. And then, because the world does not pause, because 30 people in a backyard cannot hold their breath indefinitely, because life continues its ordinary motion even in the middle of extraordinary moments, someone near the food table knocked over a plastic cup and it clattered against the concrete and the spell broke, and people exhaled, and 2 of the cousins near the pecan tree were crying quietly, and Donna had both hands pressed to her mouth, and Uncle Ray had set his cores down on the nearest surface without looking at it and was staring at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not pride exactly. Something more complicated than that. Something that looked like the sudden awareness of a very long mistake. I looked at Brandon. He was looking at the ground. His beer was still in his hand, hanging loose, forgotten. He was not laughing. He was not smiling. He was standing in the middle of his own party like a man who has just been handed a map of a place he thought he knew and discovered that everything he'd labeled was wrong. I did not feel triumphant. I had told myself 1,000 times over 22 years that if something like this ever happened, if someone ever said out loud in front of the people who had always looked through me, this is who she is, this is what she did, I would feel something large and complete. Vindication. Satisfaction. The particular relief of being finally, irrevocably seen. What I felt instead was tired. And underneath the tired, something quieter. Something I didn't have a word for yet. It felt like the moment after a landing. When the gear is down and the runway is under you and the aircraft is rolling to a stop and you realize, not triumphantly, just factually, that you made it. That the thing you were not entirely sure was going to work has worked. And now you have to figure out what comes next. Colonel Pruitt had returned to his chair. He sat with his hands wrapped around his paper cup, looking out at the Trilene the way he'd been looking at it all afternoon. Like he was comfortable with his own company. Like he had said the thing that needed saying and did not require anything further from the world. I stood in the middle of the patio. 30 people slowly, carefully, resumed being a party around me. And Brandon set his beer down on the grill's side shelf and walked, quietly, toward the far end of the yard. I watched him go. In a few minutes, I knew I would have to decide what to do about that. About him. About this afternoon and what it had broken open and what, if anything, could grow in the space where the silence used to be. But for right now I stood in the amber July light in my Aunt Donna's backyard outside Waco, Texas, and I let myself be exactly where I was. It was the first time I had done that in longer than I could remember. I found him at the far end of the yard, near the old fence where the property line met a dirt easement road that went nowhere in particular. He was standing with his back to the party, looking out at the flat land the way people look at things they're not actually seeing. His beer was gone. Both hands in his pockets. I almost didn't go after him. I stood at the edge of the patio for a long moment, watching him stand there, and ran the old calculus one more time. How much it would cost. What it would change. Whether the conversation that was waiting at the far end of that yard was one I had the energy for on this particular afternoon, in this particular heat, after what had just happened in front of 30 people. Then I thought about 14 years of sure, something like that. I walked across the yard. He heard me coming, the dry grass gave me away, but he didn't turn around until I was standing beside him. When he did, his face was different from the face he'd been wearing all afternoon. The easy confidence was gone. Not replaced by anything dramatic. Just gone. What was underneath it was younger somehow, and less certain and more real. Maggie, he said. Brandon. We stood side by side for a moment, looking at the same flat nothing he'd been looking at. A scissor-tailed flycatcher landed on the fence post 20 feet away, stayed for 3 seconds, left. I didn't know, he said finally. I know you didn't. I mean, he stopped. Started again. I genuinely did not know. I thought you were, I don't know what I thought. Administrative. Support staff. Something like that. He exhaled slowly through his nose. That doesn't make it better. I know that. I'm just... Brandon. I said it quietly. Not unkindly. I know you didn't know. That's actually the part one want to talk about. He looked at me then. Something shifted in his face. The defensive posture that had been assembling itself, the careful architecture of a man preparing to be attacked, went slightly still. You didn't know, I said, because you never asked. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Not once, I said. In 22 years. Not one question. Not, what's it like, not what do you actually do up there, not are you okay, not what did you see, not what does it cost you. Nothing. I kept my voice level. Not because I wasn't angry, I was somewhere deep and old, but because anger wasn't what this moment needed. This moment needed the truth, and the truth didn't require a raised voice. Every time I came home you already had the story written. Maggie went into the Air Force. Maggie does something administrative, probably. Maggie is fine. No further questions. Brandon was quiet for a long time. The party continued behind us. I could hear it, the low hum of conversation restarting. Someone laughing near the food table. Donna's voice rising above everything else the way it always did. The ordinary sounds of people resuming ordinary life after something extraordinary had moved through it. Why didn't you tell us? He asked. Not defensively. He asked it the way someone asks a question when they genuinely want to know the answer and are slightly afraid of it. Why didn't you just say something? Any of it? I thought about that for a moment. The honest answer was not a simple one. Because every time I walked into this yard, I said slowly, I could feel the frame you'd already built for me. Maggie, the Air Force person. Maggie who does the military thing. Maggie who we don't quite know how to talk to, so we talk around her. I looked out at the fence line. And after a while you start to fit yourself into the frame. Not because you want to. Because it's easier than fighting it every single time. Because fighting it means making people uncomfortable at their own parties, and making people uncomfortable at their own parties means being the difficult one, and I was so tired of being the difficult one. Brandon said nothing. So I stopped, I said. I stopped offering. I stopped explaining. I came home, I sat in the chair by the edge of the patio, I drank my tea, I smiled at Donna, and then I drove back to Austin. And I told myself it was fine. I paused. It wasn't fine. I just got very good at pretending. He turned to face me fully now. His jaw was tight, not with anger. With the particular tension of a man holding something in that wants to move. The valley, he said. What that man said. The Rangers. He stopped. Was that real? Yes. And the landing. The hydraulic thing. Yes. Jesus, Maggie. Yeah. He put one hand on the fence post and leaned against it and looked at the ground for a moment. I watched him process it, watched the information move through him, watched it find the places where his existing understanding of me had been and discover that those places were empty, that the person he'd had filed under a label marked cousin, Air Force, administrative had been somewhere else entirely, doing something else entirely for 22 years. I made a toast, he said. Quietly, like he was hearing it back for the first time. I made a joke about paperwork. You did. In front of 30 people. Yes. He exhaled. A long, slow exhale that sounded like something being released. I'm sorry, Maggie. I'm not saying that because Colonel whoever just saluted you in front of the whole family, and now I feel like an idiot. I'm saying it because I should have asked. A long time ago. I should have asked and I didn't, and I told myself that was fine too. There it was. The thing underneath the thing. The admission that cost something. I looked at him for a moment. Brandon had his mother's eyes, Aunt Donna's eyes, wide-set and dark and capable, when they wanted to be, of a certain kind of honesty. I had forgotten that. I had spent so many years looking at the rest of his face, the easy smile, the confident posture, the beer held loose at 2 fingers, that I had stopped looking at his eyes. Why didn't you ask? I said. Not as an accusation. As a real question. He was quiet for a long moment. I think, he said carefully, I think I was afraid that if I asked, the answer would make me feel bad about myself. About the things I hadn't done. The risks I hadn't taken. He said it slowly, like he was working it out as he spoke. It's easier to assume someone's life is smaller than yours than to find out it's bigger. Because if it's bigger, then you have to ask what that says about you. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. It was possibly the most honest thing he had ever said to anyone. I stood with that for a moment. Let it exist between us without filling the space around it. I know, I said finally. Because I did. Because I had spent 22 years making the same calculation from the other side, deciding not to speak because speaking would make them feel something they weren't ready for. We had both been protecting each other, in the clumsiest possible way, from a conversation that might have been worth having years ago. The scissor-tailed flycatcher was back on the fence post. Or a different one. It was impossible to tell. She loves you, Brandon said. Donna. She talks about you all the time. She has the article. What article? He looked at me sideways. The one from the Air Force Times. 2011, about he paused. About Kandahar. She has it laminated. In her kitchen drawer. I felt something move through my chest that I didn't immediately have a name for. She never told me that, I said. She didn't want you to think she was bragging. A brief, complicated smile crossed his face. She's got a whole thing about not bragging. Apparently it skips a generation. I laughed. A real laugh, short and surprised, the kind that arrives before you decide to let it. Brandon looked at me when I laughed. Looked at me the way you look at someone when you realize you've missed them. Not the idea of them. Not the version of them you'd filed away, but the actual person standing in front of you. Tell me, he said. If you want. About what it was actually like. I know it's a lot to ask. I looked at the flat brown land beyond the fence. The late afternoon light was going gold and long, and the heat was finally, incrementally, beginning to release. Yeah, I said. Okay. We stood at the far end of Donna's yard, 2 people who had been in the same family for 43 years and were, in some meaningful sense, just now meeting each other. And I started to talk. We stayed at the fence line until the light went completely gold. I don't know how long that was. 40 minutes, maybe. An hour. Time moves differently when you're saying things out loud that have lived inside you for a long time. It expands, becomes elastic, stops being measured in minutes, and starts being measured in the distance between one true sentence and the next. I told him about the academy first. The parts that were hard in ways nobody talks about, not the physical training, not the academics, but the specific loneliness of being one of 11 women in a class of 240, of learning to be simultaneously invisible and hypervisible, of understanding early that you would have to be twice as precise and half as loud as the men beside you just to occupy the same amount of space. I told him about my first solo flight, a Tuesday morning in October over the high desert outside Colorado Springs, the way the world looked from up there, reduced to geometry, clean and simple and indifferent, and how for the first time in my life I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I told him about Bagram, about Al-Udeid, about the particular quality of silence in a cockpit at altitude, 30,000 feet over nothing, before a mission begins. I told him about September 14, 2009. Not all of it. Not the parts that belonged to the valley and the men in it and the 37 minutes that I had spent 15 years walling off. But enough. The call coming in. The voice on the radio, tight, compressed, holding something large. Rolling in. The hydraulic warning light blinking amber in my peripheral vision on the approach, steady and patient as a metronome. The landing. The staff sergeant from Decatur looking at me with that expression he didn't have a name for. Brandon listened. That was the thing I kept noticing. He listened the way people listen when they have stopped preparing their next sentence and are simply receiving, leaning slightly forward, eyes on my face, occasionally nodding but mostly just still. It was not the polite listening of someone waiting for a pause. It was the listening of someone who understands they have been missing something for a long time and is not going to miss any more of it. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. The callsign, he said. Hades. He tried the word carefully, like testing weight. They gave you that after Kandahar? 3 days after. Because you went in and came back. Because I went into the dark place, I said, and came back. And they figured that was going to keep being my job. Was it? I thought about that. Yes, I said. In one way or another. Yes. He nodded slowly. Looked at the fence post. Then back at me. I used to tell people my cousin was in the Air Force, he said. Just like that. My cousin's in the Air Force. Like it was a fact about you, the same as your height or something. Not something you did. Just something you were. He exhaled. I didn't understand that those were different things. Most people don't, I said. It's not your specific failure. It feels pretty specific right now. Yeah, I said. I know. The party behind us had settled into its evening register. Quieter, slower, people sitting rather than standing. The food mostly gone, a few of the older cousins already making leaving sounds. Someone had turned the music back on, lower than before. Patsy Cline this time, drifting across the yard in the cooling air. Donna appeared at the back door of the house and looked out at us across the yard. She didn't call out. She just looked, and when she saw us standing together, something in her face went soft and relieved in a way that told me she had been watching for this, or something like this, for a long time. She went back inside. Can I ask you something? Brandon said. Sure. Did it bother you? Not the toast or whatever I said. I mean in general. All the years of coming back here and nobody asking. He looked at me carefully. Did it actually bother you, or did you genuinely not care? It was a good question. An honest question. The kind you can only ask someone when you've stopped performing and started actually wanting to know. Both, I said. At different times. Sometimes I'd drive back to Austin and I'd be furious. This quiet, private fury that I wouldn't let myself show at the party because showing it meant explaining it and I didn't want to explain it. And sometimes I genuinely didn't care. Sometimes I'd come home and just be glad for Donna's cobbler and the shade from the live oaks and I'd think, this is enough. This piece of it is enough. I don't need them to know the rest. Which was it today? I looked at him. Today, I said I was furious. He absorbed that without flinching. Good, he said quietly. You should have been. We were quiet for a moment. The Patsy Cline song ended and another one started, and somewhere near the food table a child I didn't recognize was running in circles for reasons known only to herself. Colonel Pruitt, Brandon said. The old man. Do you know him? No. I know the voice. I didn't know the face. He asked about you. Before you came over here. He pulled me aside and he didn't say much. He just said, Brandon paused, choosing the words carefully. He said, whatever you think you know about that woman, you're probably wrong. And you should fix that while you still can. I looked out at the tree lane. He said that. Word for word. The old man had gone inside. Sometime in the last hour he had quietly, without announcement, folded his chair and carried it to the back porch and disappeared into the house. His paper cup was still on the patio railing where he'd left it. That was the only evidence he'd been there at all. I thought about a radio voice 14 years ago. Tight and compressed. The kind that holds something very large very carefully. I thought about 37 minutes over Kandahar province and a hydraulic warning light, and a staff sergeant from Decatur, and a call sign that arrived 3 days later like a verdict. I thought about how many threads connect people without their knowledge. How many lines run between lives that never intersect in any visible way, until one afternoon in a backyard in central Texas when an old man stands up from a folding chair and says a single word and suddenly the threads are visible, all of them, all at once, the whole invisible web of it. He was right, I said. About fixing it. Brandon looked at me. Something in his face was open in a way I hadn't seen before. Open and slightly uncertain, the way faces look when they're done performing and don't yet know what comes next. Tell me more, he said. About what it was actually like. I've got time. I looked at him for a moment. My cousin Brandon, 43 years old, white polo shirt with a small grease mark near the second button that hadn't been there at the start of the party. Hands in his pockets. Listening. The first time I broke the sound barrier, I said, I was over the Mojave Desert. It was 6:40 in the morning and the light was just coming up and everything below me was purple and gold. He didn't say anything. He just listened. And for the first time in 22 years, I talked in my Aunt Donna's backyard like someone who knew she was allowed to take up space. I slept better that night than I had in months. I don't know why that surprised me. Maybe because I'd driven back to Austin expecting to feel wrung out, the way you feel after any day that asks more of you than you'd planned to give. Instead, I felt something closer to the opposite. Lighter somehow. Like something that had been taking up space in my chest for a very long time had shifted position, not disappeared, but moved into a configuration that was easier to carry. I made coffee at 6:30. Sat on my back porch in the early morning quiet and watched the light come up over the neighborhood and thought about the day before in the loose, unhurried way you think about things when you're not trying to arrive anywhere in particular. I thought about Donna's face when Brandon and I came back from the fence line together. How she'd looked at us from across the yard. Not surprised exactly, but something adjacent to relief. The way she'd squeezed my hand when I said goodbye. 2 squeezes quick. The same thing she'd done since I was 8 years old, her private shorthand for I love you, I see you come back. I thought about Colonel Pruitt. The wet eyes that weren't quite crying. The salute, clean and precise, in the amber July light. Thank you for coming back. Not from Afghanistan. I knew exactly what he meant. I thought about Brandon's face when I described the Mojave at 6:40 in the morning, purple and gold and perfectly still below 40,000 feet. He had leaned against that fence post and listened with his whole self, not performing attention, not waiting for his turn, just genuinely receiving something he had no prior framework for. It was the most present I had ever seen him. It was possibly the most present I had ever been with him. My phone buzzed at 8:15. A text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Brandon. Got your number from Donna. I wanted to say it again without 30 people around. I'm sorry, Maggie. I mean it. And I want to do better. If you'll let me. I read it twice. Then I put the phone face down on the arm of the porch chair and finished my coffee. Not because I didn't want to respond. Because some things deserve a moment before you answer them. Because yes deserves more than a reflex. I picked the phone back up. I'll let you, I typed. Start by calling instead of texting next time. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then still. I set the phone down again and looked at the sky. He called that Thursday. We talked for an hour and 40 minutes, which was longer than the sum total of every real conversation we'd had in the previous 20 years. He asked questions, real ones, specific ones, the kind that told me he'd been thinking since Sunday. He asked about the F-16 versus the F-35, what the actual difference felt like from inside the cockpit. He asked about Bagram, what the base looked like, what you did on the days when you weren't flying. He asked carefully about the valley in Kandahar, not pushing past where I wanted to go, just leaving the door open. He asked about after, about retiring, about what it felt like to hand in the flight suit after 22 years and drive away. Like amputation, I told him. Except you know it's coming. You schedule it in advance. And everyone tells you you'll adjust, and they're right, and that somehow makes it worse for a while. He was quiet for a moment. Do you miss it? Every day. Is that getting better? Some days. He didn't try to fix it. He just said yeah, and that way people say yeah when they're acknowledging something rather than solving it. It was exactly the right response. I noted it. Before we hung up, he said, I told my kids about you, by the way. Told them their Aunt Maggie flew F-16s and F-35s and did 3 combat deployments and has a call sign. A pause. Emma wants to know what a call sign is. She's 9. Tell her it's the name you earn, I said. Not the name you're given. I'll tell her exactly that. Another pause. What should I tell her yours is? I thought about that for a moment. About a name that arrived 3 days after Kandahar like a verdict. About carrying it for 15 years in a private place, away from family gatherings and folding chairs and conversations that never went deep enough to need it. Tell her it's Hades, I said. And if she asks why, tell her to ask me herself next time she sees me. 3 weeks later, a manila envelope arrived at my Austin address. McLennan County return address in Brandon's handwriting. Inside, a single folded piece of paper, and beneath it, something wrapped in a sheet of brown packing paper tied with kitchen twine. I unfolded the letter first. Maggie found this in Mom's kitchen drawer where she said it's been since 2011. She wanted you to have the original. Said she could look at it in her memory just fine. She's not wrong. B. P.S. Emma has been telling everyone at school her aunt is a fighter pilot. Her teacher called. Apparently it's become a whole thing. Thought you should know. I set the letter down and unwrapped the brown paper. It was the Air Force Times article. Laminated, the way Donna had said. The lamination had yellowed slightly at the edges. 15 years of a kitchen drawer in Central Texas will do that. There was a photograph at the top. My aircraft on the flight line at Kandahar Airfield, the Hindu Kush visible in the distance, snow on the peaks, even in September. I was standing beside it. 31 years old. Flight suit. Hair pulled back. Looking at something off to the left of the frame, I couldn't remember what. The headline read, 74th Fighter Squadron Pilot credited with saving Ranger units in Kandahar Province. And beneath my name, in the caption under the photograph, 2 words in parentheses. Callsign Hades. I stood in my kitchen in Austin, Texas, and held that laminated piece of paper for a long time. I thought about Donna keeping this in her kitchen drawer for 15 years. Taking it out, probably, sometimes, Sunday mornings, maybe, or afternoons when the house was quiet, looking at the photograph of her niece standing on a flight line in Afghanistan with snow on the mountains behind her, and feeling something she had apparently decided not to name out loud because she didn't want to seem like she was bragging. She had known. All along she had known. And she had loved me without needing me to explain it, without needing me to perform it for her, without needing me to be smaller or larger or different from what I was. She had just quietly, privately, kept the evidence of me in her kitchen drawer like something precious. I sat down at my kitchen table. Outside, the Austin morning was doing what Austin mornings do in August, heating up fast, the light already going white and flat, the neighborhood settling into its summer stillness. I looked at the photograph for a long time. The aircraft. The mountains. The 31-year-old woman looking at something off-frame with an expression that was focused and certain and not yet tired. I thought about what she didn't know yet. What was still ahead of her, Kandahar and the valley and the hydraulic warning light, and a call sign that would arrive 3 days later and stay for the rest of her life. I thought about all the years of coming home to folding chairs and sweet tea and conversations that stopped at the surface. All the years of sure, something like that. All the years of making herself smaller so the room didn't have to expand. I thought about a man standing up from a lawn chair in the amber July light. One word. The whole invisible web of it, suddenly visible. I thought about Brandon leaning against a fence post at the far end of Donna's yard. Listening. Actually listening. For the first time. I folded the letter carefully and put it on top of the article. Then I picked up my phone and called Donna. She answered on the second ring, the way she always did. Like she'd been expecting you, like you were never an interruption, like the whole world could wait and you were the most important part of it. I got the package, I said. Oh, good, she said. I wasn't sure about the lamination. It was your Uncle Ray's idea. You know how he gets. Donna. Why didn't you ever tell me you had it? A pause. The particular pause of someone who has been waiting for a question for a long time and is taking a moment to find the right answer. Because it was yours, she said simply. Not mine to wave around. I just kept it safe for you. Until you were ready for it. I pressed my free hand flat against the kitchen table. Thank you, I said. Oh, honey. Her voice was warm and matter-of-fact, the way it had always been. That's what family's for. I didn't say anything for a moment. Outside, a mockingbird landed on the back fence and ran through its repertoire, cardinal, blue jay, something I didn't recognize, cycling through borrowed voices with complete confidence, as if it had always known that singing in many languages was not confusion but range. Donna, I said. Yes, sweetheart. Tell Uncle Ray the lamination was a good call. She laughed. That big, whole-body laugh that had filled every room she'd ever been in. I absolutely will not, she said. His head's big enough as it is. So, back to that moment on the patio. The sweet tea glass cracked in two on the concrete. The music stopped. An old man stood up from a folding chair and crossed a backyard in Central Texas and said one word that opened 22 years of silence like a seam coming apart. I've thought about that moment a lot since July. Not obsessively, just the way you return to certain coordinates when you're trying to understand how you got from one place to another. Trying to trace the line backward from who you are now to who you were before something changed. Here is what I understand now that I didn't understand then. The silence was never really about Brandon. It was never really about the toast, or the joke about paperwork, or 22 years of being filed under a label that didn't fit. Those things were real, and they cost something, and I'm not going to pretend they didn't. But the silence was mine. I built it, maintained it, defended it with both hands every time I came home and sat in the chair at the edge of the patio and told myself that 2 hours and Donna's cobbler was enough. I told myself I was protecting the things that mattered from people who couldn't understand them. And maybe that was partly true. But it was also, if I'm being completely honest, the easier choice. Speaking up costs something. Staying quiet costs something different. I chose my cost, every time, and I called it dignity when sometimes it was just exhaustion. Colonel James Pruitt didn't save me that afternoon. I want to be clear about that. I don't need saving. I know who I am and what I've done and what it cost and what it was worth, and I have known that for a long time regardless of whether anyone at a backyard birthday party knew it too. What he did was something smaller and more specific and, in its own way, more profound. He simply said the true thing out loud. In the right room. At the right moment. With the particular authority of someone who had been in the valley and knew exactly what the voice on the radio had meant. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person who knows. One person willing to stand up and say, I was there. I know what this cost. I am not going to let it go unnamed. I still think about the phone call with Brandon. The hour and 40 minutes. Emma wanting to know what a call sign is. The name you earn, I told him. Not the name you're given. I have been thinking about that distinction ever since. About all the names we carry that were given to us without our consent. The family roles, the assumptions, the comfortable fictions people construct about who you are because the truth is more complicated than they have time for. And about the names we earn. The ones that arrive after something hard. The ones that tell the truth about where you've been and what you came back from and what you're capable of in the dark. I am Margaret Calloway. I flew F-16s and F-35s for 22 years. I did 3 combat deployments. I made a landing in Kandahar in 2009 with a compromised stabilizer and 6 minutes of fuel reserve, and before that I pulled 2 Ranger units out of a valley that the people on the ground had already written off. I came home to folding chairs and sweet tea and 22 years of being smaller than I was, and I survived that too, which, some days, felt like its own kind of mission. My call sign is Hades. I earned it. It's mine. And if you've spent years being seen as less than you are, if you've learned to make yourself fit a frame someone else built for you, if you've sat at the edge of your own life drinking sweet tea and telling yourself it's enough, I hope this finds you at the right moment. You don't need a retired Air Force officer to stand up and say your name in front of 30 people. But I hope someone does. And if no one has yet, consider this me standing up. If this story found you today, share it with someone who might need it tonight. You never know who's been sitting quietly at the edge of the patio, waiting for someone to finally ask the right question.